everybody? Richard Dolan here for a courageous conversation.
Well, man, today, you're right. There's no going back.
How do you feel the weight of that desire?
I have been there for a while.
Story's still being written, and you cut the story short.
As they say, I'm playing with house money.
They said, neo-fascist.
You can't imagine, Richard. I've heard everything now.
But I'll tell you what, you ain't never buying your time back. Value your time.
Once you start a courageous conversation, there ain't ever going back to an ordinary one.
It's good to see Kevin in the house. And I know we've got lots of great people in here. So we're going to get started because we've just struck 3:30 Eastern Standard Time. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everybody. It's Richard Dolan here for a courageous conversation. I'm delighted to have people from all around the world here, listening in, dialing in. We have a legendary conversation today with an incredible human being named David Falk. Now, I know that we're going to get to an introduction shortly because I know he's just dialing in. But, man, I got to tell you, for the past 2 seasons, I've had the profound pleasure of actually working with all of you from around the world. We have Costa Rica in the house. We have New Zealand here. We have Australia represented. We have folks in from the UK, Spain, and even Portugal. We have people all across Canada. What's up, Alberta? I see you, Edmonton, Calgary, Port Hope. That's Ontario. Wow, that's in my province. We've got Vancouver in the house. We have Port Moody in the house. What's going on? I see you, New York. I see you, Las Vegas. I see we have Los Angeles in the house, Beverly Hills in the house, Miami Strong here in the house. Put yourselves in the chat room. Let David know where you're from, where you're coming in from. We have Noam Ohad in from Israel. I know that when we get David going, he's going to say, gosh, I want to go back. He loves that part of the world. We'll hear more from him shortly. But that being said, I want to just welcome each and every one of you here. As you all know, Courageous Conversation started as a stand for people who were dealing with this crisis thing, this COVID thing, this corona thing. And we all thought that by connecting through conversation with people that inspired us would be a real great way to kind of come at the end of the week, raise a glass and toast yourselves to humanity to say, hey, you did it. You made it. You're here. Here's to you, Stuttgart, Germany. Here's to you, Kevin Honeycutt. Good to see you guys. Welcome. Now for today, I felt it was really important to maybe dig deep and find on YouTube something that would capture the essence, the magic, the power of who David Falk is. And I mean, I got to tell you something, folks. I got to tell you something. For those who are watching the recording, 650,000 listeners post our live recording. I mean, you got to know something. It's hard to find one thing you want to show people about David Falk. And you want to know why? Because if you remember the movie, The Wizard of Oz, the whole movie was predicated on the fact that you had these characters that were seeking and looking for the thought leadership of the Wizard of Oz. And at the very end, and I know I'm going to ruin it for all of you, is that behind the curtain was this man, and I'm not suggesting that David is small nor short, but there was a man that was pulling the levers and pushing the buttons who indeed was the Wizard of Oz. Now that's who David Falk is. A man who's behind the curtains, pushing the buttons, having pulled the levers in some of sports' most memorable, epic, legendary moments that the history books will always, in fact, repeat, record, and revere. So with that being said, I'm going to go straight into my YouTube here because I want to show you one little introduction, which is so important to me to show you because I think it really sets up the tone for who David is. Take a look. You see that, Noam?
David Falk taught me the evolution of business, how to utilize my likeness, my personality, my basketball talent, and channel that into the business aspect of Michael Jordan as a person.
Everyone who's been represented by David turns out winning. He really takes good care of his people. And we become great friends. And, you know, my life has gotten a lot better as a result of my association with David.
I think the only person I've ever met who's more competitive than David Falk is Michael Jordan. I think what's made him successful is his tenacity. You know, he never stops.
The more I was around him, even though I couldn't get in a word because he talked so damn much, I knew that I liked this guy. You know, I really liked him, and I thought he really worked hard at what he did, and that was very important to me.
If David Falk had been my agent, I'd probably be the happiest man in the world today because he knew how to strike a deal with other owners.
David Falk's reputation, I think his reputation towards the players, from the players was great. The management side, they thought it was cutthroat. He's hard nosed, hard negotiator. So he was always in the corner for the players.
I would say that the words I would use to characterize my relationship with David while I was commissioner was contentious friends, or we were friendly and contentious at the same time.
You see what I mean? Now let's give him a real warm welcome, our very good friend, the one and the only Mr. David Falk. What's up, David?
Thank you for that very kind introduction.
Boy, I got to tell you, it's really hard to narrow it down because there's so much that can be said about you, who you are, the difference you've made, the difference you continue to make. I mean, I can introduce you as an incredible son to Pearl, an incredible father to a beautiful family. I mean, I can go on to talk about who you are to Rhonda, who you are to players, who you've been to the league, who you are across many sports, the philanthropist you are, the educator you've been, I mean, the mentor, the mentee, but best of all of them, my friend. I mean, gosh, David, it's such an honor to be talking to you today. So first and foremost, how are you?
I'm doing great. Obviously we're going to talk about the pandemic a little bit today. And I had a long conversation this afternoon I'd like to share with you and your listeners, saying that, while this is not what I would have wished for, and there are a lot of restrictions in our lifestyles, overall, I think that we're very blessed. No one in my family has contracted the disease. We've been tested. I know you're a pioneer in testing of COVID. And I think that we're blessed for what we have. We could be in a one-bedroom apartment with 4 kids, worrying every day, are they going to be healthy? And so I think a lot of the approach to COVID has got to be psychological as opposed to simply scientific. It's how you look at your situation. And I think most people that I know overall are very, very fortunate.
Well, indeed you are, and indeed we are. So let's get started with this conversation. God bless the family. I know that you've been very dedicated and committed to making sure that everyone is safe and sound. And that's the kind of dad you are. So folks, here's the thing about you. Let me start from the beginning. When I had the chance of meeting you, David, I'm sure that to rewind the history tapes for people that know who I am and know who you are, but want to know how do we come to meet. I have a great story, because it's not every day you get to work with someone like a Juwan Howard, who, for those who don't know, is a 2-time NBA world champion. I mean, one of the longest standing, most legendary players in the world of the NBA. It was actually David Falk who negotiated the very first $100 million contract in the NBA that took effect. Not talking about Alonzo Mourning's contract, by the way, but more on that a little later on. And after working with Juwan, when I asked him now what, we both kind of came up with the idea of, hey, why don't we come up with a plan to buy a piece of the Miami Heat, to become equitable stakeholders? And I mean, Magic Johnson just negotiated this incredible deal to be a part owner in the Dodgers. Why don't we do that? He goes, well, before I do anything, you got to talk to David Falk. I said, okay. And David and I spoke every day, where he talked sensible, he talked simple, but every time I called him, he said no to me. And I kept coming back and kept coming back. And it was during that time I really came to learn, realize, and appreciate everything that this man has been for not just Juwan, but for all the players. So David, take us back to just what made you want to become an actual agent, a lawyer, a negotiator, the argumenter that I know you've been touted to be. Where did that start for you?
Well, since you have an international audience, my parents are both first-generation Americans. My grandparents emigrated from Poland, all 4 of them. My grandfather on my mother's side was a scholar, and all of his children went to college. My mom went to college at a time when very few women went. She graduated at 19, and she was my life's mentor. She really stressed education. And from an early age, I always wanted to be a lawyer. I never wanted to be a fireman or an Indian chief or an astronaut. I always wanted to be a lawyer. And I began to love sports probably about 12 or 13 years old. And I had this sort of romantic notion in high school, like, wouldn't it be cool if you could combine a career in law and a career in sports? Now, at that time, the sports agenting industry basically didn't even exist. It really started in the late 60s. A gentleman named Mark McCormick, who was a pioneer, started the business. And my very first day at college at Syracuse University, I met the 2-star basketball players on my dorm floor, became great friends to this day. And I thought, wow, how cool is this when we all become seniors? I'm going to represent these guys. And lo and behold, one of the two was the 6th leading scorer in the country, got drafted. And we talked about it. We both knew that I had no clue what to do. So I went off to law school to get some training. And in law school, I started networking, met a lot of different people through friends and family. And because the business was so small, they all said, God, we love your passion, but we're not hiring anyone. And we're certainly not hiring anyone with your academic qualifications. Meet this guy. And so I met all these different people. And finally, I was in law school in Washington, D.C. They said, you should meet this gentleman named Donald Dell, who's the Davis Cup captain. And that's how I got my start, working for Donald for free, because he wouldn't hire me. And I offered to work for free.
Now, Mel, before you get into that legend, let's back up a little bit, because unlike any other interview, this is a real educative conversation. Lots of people from around the world. If you're just tuning in, you got David Falk here, legendary GOAT, greatest of all time, agent to the stars. Put some love in there in the chat room for David. Let him know where you're in from. He'd love to know. We got the entire world cornered here, David, for a conversation, an intimate chat inside your home right there in Bethesda. I mean, we're so grateful to be in your home right now. So folks here, check this out. So first and foremost, Pearl, your mom, I mean, she was a mentor. She spoke 8 languages. She was an interpreter back in the war days. I mean, knowing who she was definitely sounds like being a mentor was number one. First and foremost, everyone needs a mentor. Number two, it sounded like you weren't afraid to start with nothing. So even though you knew nothing, you were willing to actually enter conversations knowing that you didn't know much. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely.
But willing to work for free to learn the craft. Let's pick up from there. Well, where did that commitment to do that come from?
Honestly, it was a spur of the moment decision. I called Donald for months to try to get an interview. Everyone else was very generous with their time. Didn't take long. I met Larry Fleisch, who founded the NBA Players Union. I met Bob Wolf, who represented Larry Bird, and Doug Flutie. Met a lot of really well-known people. Donald was impossible to get through, and he gave every excuse that an executive gives when they don't want to take a phone call. He's in a meeting, he's at lunch, he's out of town, he's in the bathroom, whatever. And finally one day I had it. I thought this was so rude. And I rarely went to the library in law school. I went to the law library back in the days when there were payphones. This is pre-cell phones. And I bought a bunch of quarters. I called him every 10 minutes. And when he ran out of excuses, he gave me an interview, kept me waiting 3 hours to have the interview. And I was doing it on my lunch break from a job at a law firm. And we got done with the interview. So look, really appreciate your interest, but we're not hiring right now. And I was crushed. And I said, well, I'll work for free. And I guess he thought that was a pretty good offer. He couldn't turn it down. So I worked for free the entire summer at night. I worked during the day for a very large law firm called Sibley and Austin in Washington from 9 to 6. And then I walk across the street and work for Donald from 6:30 to 11. And at the end of the summer, he gave me a part-time job clerking while I was a third-year law student. And they allowed you to work 20 hours a week and be a full-time student. I probably averaged 80 hours a week. I basically didn't go to school. I did what it took to take my exams. And I waited all year long, Richard, all year long to get a job. And finally, a week after graduation, I think my friends from law school would have burned his building down if he didn't hire me because they know how badly I wanted this. He sat me down for lunch at 4 o'clock. 4 o'clock. Now, for me, that's almost dinner. And he said, look, you worked really hard. I'd like to make you an offer and start you out at $13,000 a year, which was less than any secretary in the office was making. I said, Donald, I'm a lawyer. Starting lawyers, even in the government, make 18 to 20. And he said, really? That much? I said, yeah. I said, well, that's great. But at Del Crago, starting associates, the only one started at 13. And I got it to over 17 years. Well, I had a wonderful experience at ProServe, and it got me on my way in my career. I never made much money, but I had incredible job satisfaction, doing something I loved.
But it's something, and I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I want to catch it because I want everyone to write this down or make a mental note of this. David, I mean, even your wife, Rhonda, noticed in you, you had ambition. And it's only until you get to know who you are and what you've done and the lengths you went through just to be driven and remain committed to an opportunity. Where did that come from? Because there seems to be a hunger that you had to be somewhere you really want to be, and you wouldn't take no for an answer. And I know that to be true because it's consistent with the reputation you've earned in the league for being the most powerful person in the NBA amongst many leagues, second to the commissioners, because you simply get it done. Where did that come from?
I think mostly it came from my mom. It probably came from my grandfather, who I really didn't know very well. He died when I was 8 years old, but he came to America with nothing. He was paid to be a scholar in Poland. He came. He was Jewish. He didn't believe in working on Saturdays, but he ended up opening up a store that had to be open on Saturdays if he wanted to make money. And I think nothing that his children did was good enough. Not in a bad way, in a loving way, but he had very, very high standards. My mom got the gene. I definitely have the gene, and my older daughter, Dana. I said, I'm sorry, sweetie. Your parents always argue, who's got the good hair, who's got the nice eyes, who's athletic. I'm sorry, you got the gene, and I know that I can be very demanding. It's not something that's intentional, it's genetic. And I think the good part of that is that I'm my own worst critic. I'm grateful for the kind words people say, but if I don't satisfy myself, it really doesn't do very much for me. And so I have very, very high standards for myself. And people who don't know me in the world of sports think that I'm either arrogant or I'm greedy or whatever. And I said, no, you don't understand. This is just me trying to please my mom. It's just something inside of me. I know that she's going to say, you could have done better. No matter what you do, she's an extremely loving person, but incredibly demanding. And I think that shaped me for the kind of person that I am.
David, I get to say this, and I don't get to say this often to a lot of people because I've come to know who you are. We talk often. We're doing other things together, which in the witness of the hundreds of thousands that will watch this recording, I want you to know I'm grateful. I'm humbled. I'm lit up, scared to death, and happily so, by the way. But I get your drive because I've always wanted to work with you. But here's, just to get back to the point, it would almost seem like I can see how being the hard negotiator and always wanting to win, it sounds like for everybody, they've got to get grounded with what drives you. Who is it you want to make happy? Who is it you want to make proud? So when I look at David Falk, and all of you look at yourselves, how do you live? How do you lead? And what will you leave? Because the way you've lived and how you've led, David, is equal to what you're leaving. And we'll get to your philanthropy and your trusts and the wonderful work that you're doing in the world of education. But it's consistent. Like who you were in the 80s and who you are right now in 2020 is actually quite a mirror of each other. Wouldn't you agree?
I think I've matured. I think as you get older and your experiences shape you, I would say in a very, introspective way, power anybody in a negotiation. I wanted to be like a trial lawyer. I wanted to present my evidence and persuade them that what I was asking for was the correct amount. Having majored in college in economics, I early on, probably in the early 80s, long before people heard the word analytics, I developed my own crude analytics. I developed what I would call leading economic indicators in the business of basketball to try to explain to the owners why I thought my players were worth what they were worth. So as an example, in 1985, I signed on my own my first big player, which was Patrick Ewing. And at the time, the highest rookie ever had made $1.2 million a year. And the highest veteran in the history of the league made $2 million. And we ended up signing Patrick for $3.2 million a year for 10 years. 55%. And people ask, how could that happen? I said, it's very simple. Prior to 1985, the two worst teams in the league would flip a coin to see who could draft the best player. You had a 50-50 chance if you were a bad team of getting a Magic Johnson, a Michael Jordan, and Patrick Ewing. But in 1985, David Stern was concerned that the teams would start losing intentionally to get into the coin flip. So we created a lottery system where the 7 teams back then, now there's 14, that didn't make the playoffs had a blind lottery. And the Knicks won the first lottery. Now, you don't have to do complicated math. If the odds go from 50-50 to having the number 1 pick to 1 in 7, you just made an asset that's very valuable, more scarce, and the value goes up. And so I basically told the Knicks, there are no comps, throw everything else out. There's a very unique situation. It's an aberration, and we need to approach it in an aberrational way. And it took a while, but I was dealing with a very, very smart guy on the Knick level who ended up running baseball advanced media. And he got it. And it took all summer. But so it wasn't a question of being tough or intimidating. It was more like being a good trial lawyer and be able to see the case and present it in a cogent way. And as I got older and developed my own reputation, I think the people I dealt with realized I wasn't trying to intimidate them. I wasn't trying to beat them. The idea that negotiations, I teach negotiations like you teach real estate investment. And I teach my students negotiations is not a zero-sum game. One side doesn't win and one side doesn't lose. Both sides have to win if you want to make a deal that's going to last. And if you, in an industry like sports, which is very small, you deal with the same people over and over again. If you win too much or you overdo it when you have the edge, one day you're not going to have the edge and they're going to scalp you. As you can tell, not much left here to scalp. So you try to moderate. As you get older, you try to moderate your position. You want to be assertive. And so I believe in any industry that there's a zone of fairness for making a deal. And my job is to be at the top end of the zone, and the owner's job is to be at the bottom end of the zone. And but for an aberrational situation like Patrick, if you get out of the zone, you're going to create problems down the road. And so I came to believe that the most important aspect of what I did was to learn how to make a deal and generate goodwill with the people, because you're going to deal with them again. And you want them to know that you're trying to do a good job for your client. You're trying to be aggressive, but you're trying to be fair.
You know, that brings up another really great point because, you know, understanding that you were the pioneer behind creating your leading economic indicators. And today we've got Google and analytics and other types of digital intelligence that's tracking things and whatnot. You really, in fact, you were the first to lead the charge in determining the value of a player against the slot system, right? So if someone got drafted the 5th, it would imply that the person who got drafted 6th would actually make less than the one who got drafted 5th. And so as you were creating your own science, if it were, to significance, that really gave rise to the two things that I've heard from friends of mine, clients of yours in the business, that said, when David sold his service, he sold his competence and track record. Nothing else really mattered. And trust came. How much of that statement would you agree with?
100%. I'll tell you why. In our industry, you're dealing with really young people, 19, 20, 21 years old, that are bright but have no experience in business. And they've been recruited their whole lives because they're very talented to go to the right junior high, the right high school, the right college, and everyone's telling them how great they are. Then you go pro, and the owner's not going to tell you how great you are. He's got 14 other great athletes just like you. And so you have to be straight. And so I used to tell them, I'm not here to massage your ego. I'm here to massage your wallet. And you know, get over yourself. You know, you're not the first great player I've had. You're not going to be the last. And so you try to say I try to compare myself, and I don't want to say this in an egotistical way. I told him the following when I met. If I made someone like Juwan, who's a very bright guy, I would ask him the following question. If tomorrow morning you bought a lottery ticket for the Michigan lottery and you found out you won $500 million, who would you want to manage the money? And a lot of us said, well, I have a friend next door, a cousin. I said, no, that's the wrong answer. You want Warren Buffett to manage your money because he's the best investor in the history of the United States.
Hold on.
Arbor Gazette and say, hey, can you hear? Can you hear?
You're good now. You're good now. You just clipped out.
Yeah.
You're good.
Okay. he's not going to read the Ann Arbor Gazette and call up Juwan and say, hey, I heard you just made $500 million. I'd like to make a presentation to manage your money. That's pocket change for Warren Buffett. And so I said, smart players, instead of the agents recruiting the players, if you're really smart, you'd recruit the agent if you felt that there was a Warren Buffett out there. And we had a Warren Buffett track record. Our record, objectively, we outperformed the competition by about 20%. And so when I met Juwan, I never told you this, he literally had the printouts of all the players drafted where he thought he'd get drafted. And he asked, like, why this guy's contract so much? Why did you get more for this guy? He was really prepared. And that really registered with me. It really made a very strong impression. And so I think at the end of the day, you could be very persuasive and con someone into hiring you when you're not. I could have conned my college friends into letting me represent them, but I would have done a disastrous job because I wasn't ready. And so I believe you are selling the track record for the very same way that the player is being drafted by the pros based on his track record in college. That they understand, but when it comes to translating that on the business side, sometimes it gets a little bit lost in translation.
No, absolutely. And that gives rise to just how your journey led you to go out on your own when you launched Fame. Your firm, I mean, you were born out of a space. And actually the rumor is, or the talk was, that the movie Jerry Maguire, in some ways, shape and form, emulated a little bit of your own history, where you left a firm. And in that case, he brought only one client with him. But in your case, you brought all the clients with you.
Exactly.
Tell us about that, how you make that leap of faith.
So this will sound really crazy for someone who considers himself an entrepreneur. I never want to go on my own. I was doing my dream job, and in a very short period of time, from 1982 to 1986, in that 4-year period, I signed Michael Jordan, James Worthy, Patrick Ewing, Chris Dolman, who's the 5th all-time sacker in NFL, James Lofton, who retires the all-time receiver, John Thompson, and Johnny Dawkins, the National Player of the Year. If that had been my entire career, I would have been in the Hall of Fame. And so while I got many, many job offers to leave and run teams or be a general manager, I thought to myself, God, you have to be really stupid. You have this group of guys that are really loyal to you, that are at the very top of their profession. How could you leave that? And so as I got these offers, my boss, who became my partner and later became my employee, we flipped roles. He would ask me, you going to leave? And I said, Donald, I'm never going to leave, with 2 caveats. One, if I ever find out that there's anyone in the company other than you making more money than I am, I'm gone. I'm bringing in the most business. And 2, if I ever feel that the only way you will pay me fairly is for me to threaten to quit, I don't want to have that kind of relationship. If you don't realize what my value is, I'm going to go. And one day he failed both tests, and I had a non-compete. I couldn't stay in the industry. I was nervous as hell. I just resigned. I just couldn't work another day there. And I ended up buying the business. I did what was then called an LBO, leverage buyout. And I took the whole thing lock, stock, and barrel. So it wasn't so, he basically negotiated me out of the deal by not doing what he should have done to protect a valuable asset.
Now that gives rise to another part of the story I want to share, but in case for those who are just tuning in, we're here with David Falk. I mean, legendary agent, the curator of incredible things. He's the master negotiator, one of the most influential people in the world of sport, who is the real reason why a lot of legends are known as they are financially, especially in the world, and in a lot of ways, urbanly. So David, again, thank you so much for being here. And by the way, lots of comments in the chat room here. Of course, this is a very small audience for the recording
Should
purpose.
I go on the chat room? You want me to go on the chat?
But here, I'm going to do one even better. Are you open to getting some questions from around the world?
Of course, love to do that.
Fantastic. So we've got some.
I know
folks.
they're gonna hit the wall. They're not gonna want to hear. They're gonna want to ask their own questions.
I love it. All right. Well, if you've got some questions, get your thoughts together. Put it in the chat room. We've got production viewing those questions in advance. We already have in the queue Noam from Israel, Vincent from Edmonton, Alberta, and a number of others. But let me get to the next point, which is this. What I find fascinating, David, one of the things I learned from Juwan, who looks up to you, who always has said to me as a world champion, now head coach at the NCAA level there in Michigan. What an incredible legacy story that's becoming right now with Jace over there, but more on that another time, because that's a whole story in itself.
Tremendous story.
Immense story. Is that David always assigned a value. And when it came to selling your business, you always assigned it a value. And when you sold your company, it wasn't like the business that you were in, the services business was known to be sold quite often and at a multiple that was understood and calculable. You declared a value and you sold your business for $200 million. Would it be fair to say that you didn't ever have a self-worth issue and declaring that kind of value wasn't difficult, or was it? Tell us about what thinking went behind that.
That's a great question and a great story. So it never occurred to me that you could sell a personal service business. I was only on my own maybe 5 years, and we got a call from American Express. We got a call from one of the Waltonaires that owns Walmart that loves sports and said, we'd like to buy your business. And having worked for a large company, the second largest company in the world for 17 years, ProServe, I was the vice chairman. I sort of loved coming in the morning and seeing my name on the door. Our company was called FAME, was an acronym for Falk Associates Management Enterprise. So I really didn't want to sell. But then we got a really serious offer from a friend of mine named Bob Gutkowski, who had been the president of Madison Square Garden. And we went out and hired Goldman Sachs to be our banker. And Goldman assigned a young guy to be our banker. And he studied all our contracts. He said, the company's worth $75 million. And I said, great, I would never sell a company for $75 million. And my partner asked me, like, why not? Don't you think that's a lot of money? I said, well, considering that 5 years ago I was making $220,000 a year, yeah, it's an ungodly amount of money. But I don't want to work for someone again. I had a sort of an abusive relationship with my partner. I like being on my own and controlling my own destiny. And so I really didn't want to sell it. I was making what I thought was, good money. And so I arbitrarily decided that if I couldn't get $100 million, I wouldn't sell the company. So one day, the chairman of the company that bought us, his name was Bob Sillerman, the company was called SFX. He called me up to New York and said, look, I'm dying to buy your business and we don't seem to be making progress. What do you think the business is worth? What do your people think the business is worth? And I said, well, Goldman tells me the business is worth somewhere between 75 and 80. He said, well, my people are Bear Stearns and they're telling me the business is worth 75. Why can't we make a deal? And I said, because I really don't want to sell it at all. And I just arbitrarily decided that for the aggravation level of working for someone again, I have to get $100 million, I'll just keep it. And if you don't think it's worth 100, you won't offend me in the least, because Goldman, but I'm not going to sell it. And if you come back to me next summer, sort of like a guy who's single for a long time, the longer you're single, the harder it is to get married. Next year, my number will probably be 200. And so we made a deal in 10 minutes. So, okay, he basically tried to give us 100, but he gave us so much stock that the stock ran through the roof, ended up paying us 200. And literally 2 years into I'll tell you the epilogue to the story is better than the first part. 2 years into the deal, I was in what's called the office of the chairman. So it was the chairman of the company, the president, myself, and one other guy. Sillerman sells his company, which is called SFX, to the largest radio station company in America, Clear Channel, for $4.5 billion. And I go up to New York, we have a board meeting, we approve the merger, and I walk out of the room, I'm 50 years old, made a lot of money, I don't have a job. They've just sold the company out from under me. And I'm trying to figure out what the hell are you going to do now? And I get a call on my cell phone from the chairman of Clear Channel, who's a legend in the broadcast business named Larry Mays. And he goes, Mr. Falk, my name is Larry Mays. I'm the chairman of Clear Channel. I'd be like, I don't know, be like Warren Buffett calling you up saying, hey, my name is Warren Buffett. I'm an investor. Like everyone knows who Warren Buffett is. So Mr. Mays, I'm very familiar with who you are. Like, what can I do for you? He said, well, I don't know if you've heard, but I've just bought your company, SFX, and I want to know, are you going to stay? And I said, gosh, I just learned about this 5 minutes ago and my head is spinning. I'm trying to digest what this means for me. I'll let you know in about 6 months. And he goes, no, David, you don't understand. I didn't want to buy the business, but your chairman, Bob Silliman, literally hypnotized my two sons into buying this business. I think it's a complete boondoggle, but I'm going to stand by my sons. And the only thing that interests me in the entire company you have, I'm a big sports fan. I'm familiar with your career. If you don't stay, I'm not going to buy the business. I said, Mr. Bays, with all due respect, I'm not a megalomaniac. Sports is 8% of SFX. It'd be less than 1% of Clear Channel. It can't possibly matter to you whether I stay or not. He said, no, it's just, I'm telling you, it's a deal breaker for me. And so it's okay. Talk about pressure. You stay here holding up a $4.5 billion merger. As I said, if it's that important, I'm flattered. I'll give it a year. And at the end of the year, I left. I just couldn't stand. So what happened was our business, when we sold it, we were like Neiman Marcus. We were Ferrari. We were small with very, very high-end clients. We weren't looking for volume. We weren't trying to be Walmart. We were trying to be Neiman. Larry's son comes in to see me right after he buys the business, and he says to me, David, we're one of the top New York Stock Exchange companies in America. We're going to call on your division to produce 15% year-over-year growth. I said, look, with all due respect, you must not know anything about sports. That's impossible. I can't do that. And he said, why not? I said, because the collective bargaining in basketball only allows the player salaries to go up by 10.5%. So there's no way I can give you that kind of growth. And he said, look, I thought you were a smart guy. That's very simple. Just sign more clients. And I said, look, you don't understand. I'm not Walmart. We're Neiman Marcus. We've got to where we are by being very selective and having guys like Michael know he's not one of 900 clients. He's one of a few. And our philosophies just didn't jive. And so I wasn't angry, but it just didn't work. And it didn't allow me to be who I feel I am. I think I'm creative. I think I'm an entrepreneur, and I don't want to be stuck in a very tight wall where I can't do what made the business worth buying in the first place. They try to take